So they said they wanted to keep their door and refinish it, but they want to replace this old junky frame. I said, let's do it. So we're going to start by taking off the casing carefully because they want to reuse this because it's pretty old. Tearing out a frame can get very messy, so I like to keep the door on as long as I can. And whenever you're doing demo, it's much easier to cut things into small pieces. This is a very unusual configuration. This spacer board here is nailed to the studs, and I'm going to keep it in place. Normally you just take everything out, but this is going to be useful when I install the new frame.
I'll put the metal cutting blade on the Sawzall and just run it down there and try to cut all the nails out.
With that done, I'm going to leave the door in place and build the jamb. My door is 35 3/4 inches, so I want my jamb to be 36 inches. I'm going to put a threshold and a door bottom at the bottom of the door, and that's 1 1/4 inches. And I want an 1/8 inch gap at the top of the door. So that's 1 3/8 inches. So I'm going to measure the door, then I'm going to add 1.5 inches just to be safe, and that'll be the length of my jamb.
78 3/4. So we want it to be 80 1/4.
So we're going to start with an exterior grade frame set.
Now the jamb head, the top jamb, is going to go between the two jamb legs. So whatever your door is, you want this to be 1/4 inch bigger. So our door is 35 3/4. So we're going to cut this at 36. Right.
And when I'm working with these, I like to take out the weather stripping, also called kerf seal. Now the thick side of the jamb faces out. You do not measure that. It's the thin side where the door is going. That's where you take your measurements. So first get everything oriented so you know where the hinges go. I'll put a mark on my hinge. That helps me keep everything in position. Now you don't just screw these things together. You have to notch the jamb legs so that the top jamb fits into it nicely. And you can do this however you want. I prefer to use a Sawzall with a metal cutting blade because it gives me a nice clean cut. And if it doesn't come out perfect, you can clean it up with a chisel.
Oh, those cut, that's going to fit together just fine.
I'm going to screw these together with 2-inch nails, so I pre-drill with a countersink bit. I put 2 screws in there temporarily so I can take some measurements for my hinge locations and to get the jamb leg length correct. Now I measure the inside of the jamb because that's where the door will go. 80 1/4, cut it right there. Now I go back to the door and measure the hinges because these locations have to line up. That top hinge is at 6 9/16. Now I want to add an 1/8 inch because I want an 1/8 inch gap at the top of the door. So the top hinge will be 6 11/16. Then I do the same thing for the middle and bottom hinge. Now I transfer these measurements to my jamb leg. I want the inside edge of the door to line up with the inside edge of the jamb. So I put my hinge right there and I make a little pencil mark on the hinge on the inside edge of the door. Now I go back to my jamb leg and I line up that pencil mark with the edge of the jamb because that's going to match the edge of the door. So that's where I want my hinge. Now I'm going to unscrew that jamb leg, put my hinge mortising jig on there, and make quick work of 3 perfect mortises. Now I can screw the jamb together and hopefully it should be the right size and the hinges in the right place. Now I pop the hinge pins, take off the door, and I like to put a cut on each side of the jamb with the Sawzall carefully, and then it comes out very easily.
And this is something that's important to ask about ahead of time, alarms. Here's an old wired alarm. They said it's not active, so we're just gonna snip it. And with all that stuff out, you get everything cleaned up, pull out all the nails, screws, debris. And because we're gonna save this, I'm gonna plane these and just take this paint off, try to clean it up a little.
Now I install the jamb. When you're putting a frame into an opening like this, where there's some sort of exterior trim, you want it to be even on each side. So I've got about 3/4 inch reveal on each side. So starting with the hinge side, I want the shims in there to get the proper spacing, and I want to make sure that thing is plumb. I pre-drill the holes close to the stop so they'll be hidden by the weather stripping. I also want to make sure I can get the door square. Frame is not square, you're going to have gaps, so you got to be able to raise or lower one side of the jamb. Now the strike side, no screws, just leave it till later. Now check with your measuring tape. Make sure you have enough room for the door. We need 36 inches. If you don't have enough room, you're going to have to move the jamb somehow. You might need to do more demo, or you might need to make your jamb smaller. This looks fine. Half of the top hinge on the jamb, other half of the top hinge on the door. Now I'm going to place the door on that top hinge, slide in the hinge pin, open the door carefully, just put 1 or 2 screws in the middle and bottom hinge. We're just going to test to see how it works. It might fit, it might not. There's plenty of room on the strike side. We're going to have a good gap after we shim that, but look at that top. Whoa, that's not acceptable. This side of the jamb is too high. We need to lower it somehow or cut it. And it's just in that upper corner. Oh, we got a little bump down here with some old wood and concrete, so I'm just going to chip that out. Try it again. Now the top gap is perfect. I love it. Now I secure the strike side. Get the gap right, put your shims in there, put a screw, and test it. We're going to work from the top down, and you want to make sure your frame is flush with the inside wall. That's very important. Got a beautiful gap there. So let's go down to the next screw hole and do the same thing.
Here's another reason why I take out the weather strip. You want to test it on the outside for the alignment. See how the door touches the stop all the way up and down? Well, if your jamb was crooked, let's say I move the jamb in like that. Now look, the door hits the bottom, but it's got a big gap up top. So you want to keep that alignment. But you also want to try to keep it flush with the inside wall so you can get your casing. Outside's not as critical. You can caulk this stuff.
So we work top to bottom. We put in the shims, put in the screws. We got a nice 1/8 inch gap all along the edge of that door. Looks fantastic. So now we can work on the bottom. So I cut my threshold to length first. Then I notch those corners so it fits in there perfectly and get that secured. Then I could put in my door bottom.
Put your kerf seal back in. Mortise your strike plates.
Now you reinstall your interior casing. And there's no set way to address the outside because they're all different. I mean, look at this. At the very least, you should caulk between your new frame and whatever is outside. And then you just have to be resourceful and make everything look nice. I'm leaving it right here because we're going to put a storm door on this, and that's going to affect how we do the casing. You just replaced your old frame with a new one and kept your old door. Oh, and after I finished this job, my car wouldn't run. I had to wait 4 hours for a tow truck, and it started pouring rain. What a day that was, but the doors I did came out perfect. Hey, that pays for your car repairs.
All right.